Hello there friends, and welcome on back to Finance with Frittles. I'm glad you're with me. If you don't mind, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. It'd be much appreciated. So in our last video, we had a pretty good conversation about the finite annuity, which delivers level discrete cash flows at common intervals. And the thing about a finite annuity is there's a point in time, whether it's a year or 5 years or 30 years, where those cash flows will run out or cease to exist anymore. And that's I guess, a piece of the term of finite annuity. But what if we had a financial instrument that looked like an annuity, but went on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever?
Forever and ever.
Well, that's a common concept that we refer to as the perpetuity. And what's really interesting about a perpetuity is it takes advantage of this neat little mathematical trick where we have this ballooning or infinitely growing denominator. And what that allows us to do is take this rather large and kind of cumbersome finite annuity formula and strike out or eliminate almost all of that formula to condense it down into this concise 3-variable piece to find the present value of a perpetuity. And it allows us to figure out the value of some common financial instruments out there. For example, a security out there that acts a lot like a perpetuity is preferred stock. And the thing about preferred stock is it kind of acts like a hybrid security. On one respect, it's a senior security. It's paid out before common stock is paid out in the case of insolvency in a particular company, but it's subordinate to the corporate bonds that company has on deck. So in other words, in order of preference, you're going to pay out those corporate bonds first if the company goes bankrupt, and then anything to the preferred security, and lastly to the common stock. But a preferred stock is a great example of a perpetuity because you receive almost all of your growth from the dividend. There's really very little capital appreciation when it comes to preferred stock. So in this video, we'll take you through a perpetuity and how to apply it in a real-world situation. That's today on Finance with Frittles.
Okay, for a great example here, we'll say that we've decided that we want to purchase preferred stock from JP Chase, and we want to make sure that we receive at least a 6% annual return on our money before we buy this stock. So we go to our nearest discount brokerage firm and we take a look, and we see that JP Chase preferred stock sells for about $25, and it pays a quarterly dividend of 40 cents every quarter. So the ultimate question here is, should you invest in JP Chase preferred stock with the above criteria, knowing that you want at least a 6% annual return? Okay friends, so this calculation is fairly straightforward. We're ultimately looking for this value R, or the rate of return on the investment. We do know a few variables here. We know that the price is equal to $25. If we want to go out and purchase a share, we're going to have to fork over 25 bucks. We got that variable there. Another one is the dividend. Now this guy comes in, we've said, at 40 cents every quarter. So on an annual basis, well, I'll put this in first, quarterly here to denote that. Well, that's the same thing as $1.60 annually. So annually. All right. So we want to know if this $1.60 that we receive every year, is that enough to give us our required rate of return of 6%? In other words, what is this value R? Well, we knew that in a finite annuity formula for the present value calculation, that's the finite annuity, if I can write that out correctly, we knew that the present value was equal to the payment, or the cash flow, divided by the period rate of return, or interest rate, times 1 minus 1 over 1 plus r, that same interest rate, raised to the power of n, or the number of periods. But what's really neat here is we notice that this value n, as it grows larger and larger and larger, and in our case becomes a perpetuity because we're presupposing this is going on forever and ever and ever and ever, and we're never going to let go of this security. We find that as this value gets larger and larger and larger, this term down here, this denominator, it becomes larger and larger and larger and larger. And it soon completely dwarfs anything up here. This value 1 happens to be in the numerator, but it completely dwarfs it such that this whole term here becomes a big fat 0. And so effectively, everything in the parentheses here gets turned into 1 minus 0. In other words, you're basically taking this first term here where we have the payment divided by the value R and multiplying it by 1. So when we go from a finite annuity and we transition into a perpetuity, we recognize that this value n is increasing so ridiculously large that when we transpose this equation, this entire term goes away when we move to the perpetuity equation. And so we have a present value which is equal to the payment, or the dividend in the case of preferred stock, divided by the value R, period interest rate. And remember, this R right here, that's what we wanted to know up here, which was our question mark. Is it going to be at least 6%? So we can transpose this equation and say that the period interest rate R is equal to the payment divided by the present value, or the price. And so we're going to go ahead and plug in our variables here. We know that $1.60 is what we get in the form of a payment. That's our dividend that we receive every year. And the present value, or the price, is equal to $25. And so when we run this calculation, you come up with a figure of 6.4%. And so we know that if we were to invest in this preferred stock, the 6.4% is what we would return every year. And so the answer to our question is yes, we would invest in JP Morgan preferred stock.